Well, good afternoon, everyone. Nice to see you. I think Michael Daugherty and Mark O'Connor got sidetracked shopping. We can't seem to find them. We saw them earlier, but we're hoping they will turn up eventually. But we certainly have plenty of company for now. My pleasure to introduce Jennifer Higdon, David Heath, Daniel Kellogg, and Ken Fuchs. Ken and, yes, you can clap. So I know this is really an opportunity for people to ask questions of the composers and things that are on your mind, but maybe just to break the ice, I'll ask each of our composers to just say something about themselves and where you're from, and I don't know, whatever you feel like talking about today.
I know people have been hearing my accent and asking, where are you from? So the short answer is I was born in Brooklyn, New York, which I guess you can probably tell from my accent. But I often say it's southern Brooklyn. But I also am from Georgia, Tennessee, Ohio, and Philly is now home, Philadelphia. So I've been there 21 years, so I guess that probably really is home. But I can say, yo, yous guys. That's the Philly part of me. So I write music and have a fun time coming to Santa Cruz. This festival rocks.
Yeah,
it's just, I mean, this is a composer's dream. I always come back here, I'm like, oh, I'd like to take this orchestra and the audience home with me. I think that every time.
Well, we have to just try to emulate it other places, I think. And maybe, Jennifer, just so people have a sense, when did you know you wanted to be a composer, and when did you start writing music?
Yeah, actually, I was a very late starter. I began music at 15, self-taught, on flute, joined the high school band, and then I went off to college wanting to be a music major, and I didn't even know the Beethoven symphonies. Now that I think about that, it's actually kind of horrifying, my background. If I encountered a student like me, I'm not sure what I would say to them at this point, because I had grown up on so much rock and roll and bluegrass that I don't know what got into my imagination to think I could major in music. But I spent a lot of years in college trying to catch up, and while I was in college during my bachelor's degree, my flute teacher, Judith Bentley, got me started on composing, and man, it was like being bitten by a bug. It really was just completely addictive. So that kind of took over my life. The flute playing's still there in the background, but I must confess I've been writing so much music, I actually forgot to practice. Please don't tell Mrs. Bentley. She'll come after me.
Well, that's really unusual, though, coming to music that late.
Yeah.
And on my left, we'll go from this direction. It's my pleasure to welcome David Heath, whose piece you heard last night, the world premiere of his piece. And what do you want to say, Dave? Try to keep it clean. Thank you.
Well, I started off playing the flute, just like Jennifer, and I just really wanted to be a classical musician. I thought, that's all I ever wanted to do. And then I started going out with this girl, and her dad said, you've got to get into jazz. You really got to start wearing long trousers at some point. And so he used to take me off to these jazz clubs, and to be honest, I really didn't like it. It took quite a long time, and then I became totally sort of addicted to John Coltrane and Miles Davis, and then I decided I wanted to be a jazz player. And I did that for about 7 years, and then one day a friend of mine, and then I decided to go back to college, and a friend of mine said, would I write him a piece that felt like he was, John Coltrane and Miles Davis, but it was all notated. And quite a few people have sort of done similar things, but anyway, I said, well, okay, and he was a good friend of mine in that. And then I wrote that piece, and then he started playing it all over the place, and then Nigel Kennedy heard it, and he started playing it all over the place, and then I sort of thought, well, this is all right, and so I just gradually turned into a composer from having been a flute player. And it sort of all happened by accident, really. So,
maybe there's something about the flute.
Yeah. Don't take up the flute.
That's unsatisfying.
we probably ought to not go there.
Well, and Daniel Kellogg, whose piece you haven't heard yet, but you will if you come to the family concert tomorrow. We're trying to rehearse it between every crack in every rehearsal that I have, because it's a lot harder than most of the pieces I program for the family concert, but we're happy to have you back, Dan.
Thanks. My name is Dan Kellogg, and I live just outside of Boulder, Colorado, with my wife and daughter, who are in the back somewhere. Interestingly enough, one of my earliest composition teachers was Jennifer Higdon, so it's a privilege to be here at the festival with her. I got into composition when, as a high school student, I decided that being a conductor was absolutely the coolest thing that one could do in music, and was required by my conducting teacher to write for the orchestra in order to gain the privilege to conduct the orchestra, when it came time to study as an undergraduate, you can't, at most places, study conducting as a major. So I thought, well, why not do some composition and I'll get some skills and then I'll go on to study conducting. And after a few weeks of being a composition major, I very quickly gave up conducting and have been writing music ever since. So.
Wow. And someone you haven't met yet, this is Ken Fuchs, who's a new composer to the festival, and we're playing Ken's piece at the Mission next Sunday.
Yeah.
So welcome, Ken.
Great.
Nice to
Thank
have
you, Marin. It's so nice to be here. A real thrill. I guess I'm going to have to write a flute trio because I'm a flutist also.
Oh, my God. That's strange.
Dan plays the bass, so I think we've
That
got
is
something
wild.
here. We can do a little band.
What is it? I wanted to be a composer pretty young. Grew up loving popular music, especially musical theater, and it wasn't really till I got to college that I started studying classical music seriously. But one of my heroes is Stephen Sondheim. I just finished teaching a course on Sondheim this past week, so he's in my mind. But love all kinds of music. Wrote a lot of band music, actually, for wind ensemble, symphonic band when I was an undergraduate, and when I first heard Aaron Copland's recording of Appalachian Spring with the London Symphony Orchestra, that changed my life. That was the moment. So I'm thrilled to be here. Thank you so much.
No, it's great to have you, and we should say that probably a dream come true is that the London Symphony Orchestra has just recorded two of Ken's, two discs of Ken's music. So
yeah, that was thrilling.
That's where we met, over there.
Yeah.
And of course, pleasure to welcome you. Good morning. Mark O'Connor, whose piece was featured last night. And so, I mean, have you always been writing music, tunes and things at least?
Oh, yeah. When my first instrument was the guitar, and I was a classical guitar student and some flamenco as well. And then I started gravitating towards the violin at age 11. And with the violin, I found this kind of new freedom of expression. And I used the violin as an instrument to search out my creative ambitions. And I started arranging folk music for it when I was 12. And then starting 13, composing new pieces for the violin. And throughout my career, I think starting age 16 or 17, my CDs almost wholeheartedly became original compositions that I composed for the CDs. And throughout my career, I've been signed to Warner Brothers and Sony Classical and a few other labels. And I just want to throw this out there. I do have a new flute concerto that Marin, that I was actually talking about it to the flutist at the 99 Bottles place last night. It's something to consider.
Yeah, there you go. Well, there seem to be a lot of them around. So why don't we open the floor up for questions from you so we can really direct the conversation to address anything you're curious about. We have a couple of microphones, too. If people can ask questions with the microphone, it'd be great.
This is a question for both Marin and
Jennifer. Yeah.
Right.
Oh,
Sorry.
yeah. Oh, it's on both sides. Wow.
I think the easy question is perhaps for Jennifer. How much work was it, if any, to transcribe or translate the oboe concerto last night? And the other question to Marin, last night's concert I thought was wonderful. 3 pieces in between the beginning and the end that stood alone in their own right. But did you have difficulty deciding on the second and the third piece, the order, the Heath?
Oh, you know, that's interesting. I can answer that
right.
quickly because I thought to myself that maybe I should have put it. One of the issues, though, is that I do the programs before I see the scores a lot of times. I didn't get Dave's score until, well, it wasn't as late as some people, but, you know, I had decided about the program order earlier, and it was interesting because I was thinking the same thing last night, that I possibly should have reversed those 2 pieces. Just in terms of energy, it might have worked better. But the reality is that I added the Macmillan later, so it sort of made sense originally. But often I don't know how those things work and because the pieces are so new and we have to go to press with the program book on the early side. So, you know, sometimes I get it a little bit wrong. But I don't know, it was kind of mellowed you out for the intermission so you could have a drink. You know what I mean? If we played Dave's piece, you would have been like really hyper, and I hate that hyper audience on the interval. So,
in answer to your question about how hard it was to transform this from an oboe concerto to soprano sax concerto, it was not hard at all. I was surprised how easy it was. I didn't change hardly anything in the orchestra. A few adjustments to the dynamics, but when I really started looking at it, I was like, wow, this fits much better than I ever imagined. And I don't often do this. It's just that so many saxophonists were asking me about it. I thought, well, maybe they were asking about the oboe concerto. There must have been something that went out on a listserv somewhere. I can't figure out if saxophonists.
Kind of blog.
Yeah, I'm figuring maybe they read the oboe thing or something, and all the saxophonists are like, let's ask. So it was what I call one of my airplane hotel projects, because I can load it onto a laptop, and I know enough about saxophone instruments, and I've worked with Timothy McAllister actually quite a bit, that I could actually work on it as I'm sitting in airports and I'm in hotels or waiting on a cab or something like that, just work on little pieces of it. But it wasn't that hard. It's not normally that easy, though. I felt very fortunate in that respect.
Jennifer, I found out the other day that I was in a French horn chat room. That's what I was told.
Let's not even go this direction, people. I don't know. We don't know each other well enough, Ken. Let's not. In the back is Stuart. Yep.
I would like to ask a question about the meaning of the music that you compose. That is to say, is the music as you compose it in your own mind an abstraction by itself, or is there a theme, an emotion, a story that you're trying to communicate?
Okay, who's going for that first? Everybody, right? You interested in everyone? Anyone?
Well, if you want, I can start. For me, this is different for every composer because I often ask. But for me, when I'm doing a concerto, I think about the person I'm writing for and the instrument. But when I'm writing a piece like Blue Cathedral, which was done here 3 years ago, I'm just thinking about creating a tone poem. And emotion is always a big thing for me in music. I always think about that in the writing. So, but I think this is different. Art is different for every creator. I think it probably changes from person to person.
I'm welcoming Michael Daugherty, who got, I hope you bought me a nice present at the street fair. And whose music we're doing tonight. That's a fascinating question, though, about what goes on. I mean, from my perspective, I think maybe I have the best perspective in a way because I'm the one that has to interpret what the composers do. And I think there has to be a story to every piece, even if it's an abstract story. That's one of the things that Bernstein talked to me a lot about, is that every composer, I mean, he would say every composer spends his whole life writing the same piece. And maybe he was speaking for himself, but I think it's really true that the existential questions that each individual has don't really change that much. You know, people who are searching for faith or searching for meaning or have a sense of spirituality or whatever it is, I mean, those are questions that usually you, I think, develop in your teenage years and sort of stay with you in some form throughout your life. And I think it's true. I mean, that's when I read a book by someone I like, I usually read everything they wrote. And generally, it's sort of, even if there's the style changes, the questions are usually, the issues for them are usually the same. So I think from my point of view as a conductor, even if there's really not a story to the piece, I have to feel that there is a story and find the story, because maybe I feel there always is a story. Some of the pieces programmed last night, certainly the story is relatively simple to access, at least on the surface. Don't you think? I mean, but some stories are a lot deeper and different. Tonight, the music you're going to hear by Michael Daugherty has a very defined inspiration, both pieces. One's more abstract, I think, than the other. I mean, Michael, you can jump in if you want, if I'm misrepresenting you. But Michael always seems to have a very concrete symbol that he's evoking. But then, of course, everything around that can be interpreted. So even if the essence is dictated, I think everything around it, I mean, it's just like how you read a book and I read a book is going to be a little bit different because our emotional experience is slightly different. But I should let some other composers answer that question.
One of my teachers at Juilliard firmly believed that there was no such thing as emotion in music, and I think it's a courageous thing as the stylistic pendulum swings back over the last 15 or 20, 25 years that composers actually can come out of the closet and say it's okay to write emotional music and have emotion inform the whole creative impulse for the piece.
But don't you think that, I think because there was that time period where emotion really was sort of frowned upon, you know, when Sam Barber is ostracized, and, you know, music is something that just exists unto itself, and I think that's where audiences became completely alienated from music, and well, also art. I think in same thing. You know, when it became divorced from emotion, I can't. It's how can you access? I mean, human beings are all about emotion. I think
I can't even conceive of a piece of music or writing a piece of music without that emotional inspiration. Just doesn't make sense.
Anybody else want to jump in? Everybody's afraid of your question, I think.
Well, I mean, to be honest, that's when I start writing a piece, I've always got a story in mind. And then, like, if you look at last night, I started off wanting to write a really rhythmic piece because this is what Marin and I talked about because of the way she sort of channels the rhythm through the orchestra. And then other bits started happening. And then, you know, so what I find is if you try not to think about anything, sort of energy comes from out with you, and you're able to sort of, all these ideas come, and if you just don't get in the way and don't think about it. So for instance, I had this whole idea of the landing. Well, that gave me the beginning and the end, and then it's a question of, okay, so he lands, and then he sees all these things, and so you start thinking, and then you try to describe it in the music, and then it sort of takes over one thing from the other. But I think it's very important to keep intellect out of music, because actually it should be just pure emotion, you know, and actually the brain gets in the way of it. And I always think that, you know, like, if I'm interested in what someone's done, like for instance, I love John Coltrane's music, I'm interested in what he's doing harmonically, not because he's John Coltrane and I should know, but because I'm genuinely interested in how is he doing that, so I want to analyze it. Whereas if I hear someone's piece and it's incredibly intellectual, but I'm not interested in it because I don't like it, why go and try and find out how he did it? I don't really care how he does it, if you know what I mean, because I don't want to do anything like that, you know. So I try and keep intellect and everything out of it and just come pure from the heart, you know. So, but I think actually everyone, all of us probably feel the same way. I mean, listening to everyone else's music that I've heard, I think we'd probably, you know, I shouldn't be speaking for everyone else, but certainly that seems to be the overriding feeling of all these composers that I've heard.
Marin, in my quest to find my own kind of Americana music, I was steeped in the folk tradition, and you know, the cultural expansion of American music for the last few hundred years has been an emotional occurrence, and you know, with the melting pot culture that America's known for, and the constant displacement of peoples moving to find a better place, as it were, beyond the hollow or over the next ridge, has been really a background for most of the music that's been developed, especially in the southern United States, where I was frequently traveling as a boy around with my little tape recorder, picking up stories and fiddle tunes from these old timers. And oftentimes the lyrics that are involved represent displacement and remembering home, trying to find a better place. The sound of the train is very key in what makes American country music and bluegrass and folk music. The lonesome whistle blow signifies that someone's leaving, or and might never see them again for a long time, or a lost loved one. In some aspects, the chugging of the train is the rhythm behind the hoedown, the American hoedown, chuk 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 chuk. And these kinds of things, the constant westward expansion, which is, I think, unique in the world to this country, people constantly migrating towards beautiful Santa Cruz. I ran into a lot of them on the freeway on the way here.
Just one point, too, about the gentleman's question. I read recently, some of you may know the music of Ned Rorem, a wonderful American composer, and also diarist and writer. In one of his diaries, Ned says that a composer spends his entire life simply writing or rewriting 3 or 4 ideas, and I'm sort of turning that over, wondering what he really means by that, and I'd love to hear what some of my colleagues have to say.
Simply rewriting what?
Writing or rewriting the same 3 or 4 ideas over the course of his...
I think that's the same thing Bernstein was saying, though, that you spend your whole life writing the same piece, in essence.
Yeah.
I don't know, if you've heard my solo flute piece, Rapid Fire, it's about as different from Blue Cathedral. In fact, people often look at me and say, are you all right? Those 2 pieces are so... I have some pieces that are so diametrically opposed in energy, emotion. I think some people look at me after they hear several of my works and go, something's up.
Well, maybe you're just a deeper person than a lot of us.
I think actually I'm more confused. Maybe that's
it.
Well, you know, I always think of myself as an actor. For example, if you take Marlon Brando did On the Waterfront, and then the next movie he did was Guys and Dolls. You know, so you wouldn't think of him moving from that role. So I like to move from role to role. And also I was thinking about writing complex music. It was interesting because the composer I worked with was Ligeti, who wrote very complex music, and yet at the same time it has an emotional edge to it. So at least when I'm writing, I try to think of emotion, but I also am very interested in all sorts of little intellectual things or structures or whatever that I'm working on in the piece as well. So there's different layers. You can appreciate it from an emotional standpoint, or you can just listen to the orchestration, or then you can listen to the various little structures that I'm working in within the piece.
Is somebody in charge of the questions? Whoever gets to the microphone first is welcome to ask the question.
Your conductor and new music composition piece to this festival is a really wonderful win-win situation. Do you have parameters for the compositions that are submitted? How many were submitted this year? And I know you had a whole bunch of not only the 7 conductors who actually performed, but also a whole bunch that were auditing. What is your process also for selecting those people?
Well, I can speak to the conductors, and I'll let Michael speak to the composer, and because he does the selection of the pieces. For the conductors, we to select for this is for the conductor workshop. I don't know if all of you were aware of that we do. We team up with an organization called the Conductors Guild, so people know how to apply, and they apply through the guild. And we got about 150 DVDs, and I watched every one of them, and not all of each one, but I watched a little bit of every one, and so did Gustav Meyer, my colleague who was also teaching. And then we narrowed, then we both had a short list, and then we argued, and then we picked 7 people. So that's how it went for the conductors. But each year we get more and more applicants as the word gets out, because I think it's something that's really, really productive. And then Michael selects the composers.
You know, it's interesting because I'm sure many of us here look at composers and judge contests and so forth, but I got a giant box from Cabrillo, huge, weighed about 100 pounds. So then I hired someone to help me, and so I set aside the whole afternoon, and I sit in a chair, and I say, okay, put in the first CD. And so I listen to the first piece for a couple minutes. Okay, let's put this in the reject pile. And then I keep going through all the pieces and accept, reject, and then you have a short list, and you keep going down.
The maybe pile is always big for me.
Yeah, it's real big. It's like 50-50 and so forth. It takes a long time. But then you whittle it down to 3, and then each composer writes a piece, and you never know what it's going to be. But in this case, I thought all the pieces were really great. And Jennifer and I, we sat on a competition, the Detroit Symphony Orchestra, well, I can't remember what it was called.
Yeah, I was trying to remember that because I judged 3 competitions involving women composers within 3 weeks, and after a while it started blending in my head. What was it? The Lebanon
Yeah, so there were like,
Prize
I
or
think
something?
350 women had applied internationally, and then out of that they whittled it down to about 30, and then we listened to the
And then
30
we
and then
each
got
went
it.
through, yeah, and listened to them.
But the thing that's interesting is that back in the old days, you would just look at the scores. But now, in most cases, you listen to the music, you listen to it, and then you look at the score. So we're using our ears much more, I would say.
We are, yeah. I think all the panels I've been on, it is really, it speeds up the process. And there probably are a lot more applicants. Now that I'm thinking about it, I don't think these competitions got as many applicants. I think the ASCAP BMI used to have around 100. I think ASCAP this year had 530 for their young composer competition. And it's a staggering number. And when you think about 3 days to get through all of that with a panel of 3 people.
Yeah, and I remember when I was a student hearing at Tango at Gunther Schuller say, do you know that there are 5,000 people in America who think they are composers? And I would say that's great, because if you think about how big America is, 5,000 is not that many people, really. Yeah.
Anybody else?
Hi. I'm wondering if you could tell us a little bit about the process that you use for composing, if it's either like an experience of imagining the music and putting it directly in, going to the computer or paper, or using technology, or using the keyboard, or using the flute. I wonder if you can speak to that.
Yeah, who wants to start? Ken, you want to start?
It's a multi-part to the process. To begin with, there's a lot of sort of abstract imagining, and actually getting back to the earlier question, for me, every piece begins with trying to have an abstract idea about the emotional temperature of the piece, and that would be sort of the overall combination of things that I hope the piece accomplishes. And that's not a very specific thing, it's a very abstract thing. Along with that comes a lot of improvisation at the piano. I'm really addicted to physical sound and getting in it, and I do that in the basement with the door shut, by myself. And then I have a swivel chair with a drawing table, a piano, a computer, and a keyboard, and then there's a printer and a stereo and maybe a TV for those terrible moments when nothing is happening. And I just swivel around, and the early part of the process is lots and lots of sketching, finding the ideas that are working, developing them further, throwing things out, hitting roadblocks, going back, taking walks. That's, in a nutshell, that's my process.
You're brave to have a TV. The question I always ask my students is, what's the musical point of the piece? And I'm always amazed at how difficult it is for them to answer that question. And over the course of my life as a composer, I'm still trying to refine that for myself. What is the musical point of the piece? Because there's always a juncture of the musical craft and the technique trying to express the emotional life of the music. But my setup is pretty much like Dan's physically, and I do a lot of sketching, kind of a almost free association, and keep putting things down on paper and hate most of it. But sooner or later you go back to it, keep going back to it, refining and revising, and sooner or later a piece begins to emerge.
Yeah, mine's pretty much the same as that, but with no TV. But one thing that I was going to sort of answer the other, I'm on sort of harmonic mission. Well, not mission, but if I sat down at the piano now and sort of played what I'm into now, it's completely different to what it was, say, 25 years ago. And it's almost like where I'm at harmonically has moved forward. And so if someone said to me, write a piece now, I would start off harmonically from where I was. I wouldn't sort of go back to what I was doing in 1975. But I've learned a lot more about structures and things. So I would already know where I was going to start harmonically, and then I would just do the same, just fiddle around until something good came out, which can be some time if you got the TV on.
I gave the wrong impression with the TV.
I'm taking it.
I don't remember that being in your lesson, that you were supposed to have a TV over there, Dan. My setup's exactly the same. I think I do pretty much what Dan does without the TV. But I will tell you.
I like to watch the news and be connected. You guys can all put your heads in the sand.
I watch the Food Network.
Oh, there you go.
You know what? A lot of people ask, how much do you know everything that you're going to hear? I mean, does it all come out in your head? And for me, it's always in little fragments and lines. And I find the whole process still really mysterious. It sounds strange, but there's a certain amount of trust of letting go and hurling yourself into the abyss. And it always feels like you're jumping off a cliff, and I always swear I'm going to die. And my partner Cheryl always says, get off the ledge, you're going to be okay, you survive every single time. But I think it's a lot like painting. I know a lot of painters, and it's a lot like writing words. It's the exact same sort of process. Funny thing for me is I do a lot by instinct and by ear and not thinking theoretically, and I'm like a walking nightmare when I walk into a university to give a lecture, because usually the theory teacher has me come in, and the first question is always, how do you use theory in your composing? And I'm always like, well, I don't use theory, and I can always see the blood draining out of the theory teacher's face. But the theory is in there because there are kids who analyze this stuff for dissertations. They find all this stuff, and then they show it to me, and I'm like, wow, where did that come from? So I think a lot of it's actually just incredibly mysterious and magical, but I kind of like it that way.
Of course, echo everything that's been said. I think for me, everything is about the initial idea. Without the initial idea, it's like an academic exercise. And if I can figure out even a strand, a melodic phrase that somehow is compelling, then I have a start. With this piece last night, I actually had two moments. Originally with the writing of the Appalachian Waltz 15 years ago, I was sitting in a little cabin in Santa Fe when I wrote that piece in about 20 minutes. And I showed it to Yo-Yo Ma about 2 years later, and he embraced it and still plays it around the world. And then the idea of having that be the subject of a symphony was my next big idea. After I was able to put that together, then different techniques come into play. I used a lot of variation technique in last night's piece. The characteristic variation was key with those dance movements, hoedown, jig. There's a lot of additive and developmental variation, textural, like the brass fanfare, imitative, like the fugue movement. There's some free ground bass, but not strict ground bass, because I felt that the Appalachian Waltz melody and chordal progression was a lot more expansive in its nature. But once I get going, I think a series of breakthroughs happen. I'll be writing something, and then that little, even 5 or 6 or 7 note phrase will lead to something very beautiful. And those are the things I look forward to every time I write.
Well, I'm very similar to everybody else here. The thing I could add is that I like to work with players. So whenever I write a piece, like the timpani concerto you're here tonight, Raise the Roof, I actually worked with the timpanist for about 3 months, and I wrote the timpani part first. And we went through all the things the timpani could do, and I workshopped the piece. Also, even though all my stuff is on the computer, I will bring a violin player in to play through the violin part with the computer, and I do all the bowings, articulations. Let's add tremolos, sol ponticello, let's add a Bartok Pitts, whatever. So, and I bring in pretty much each member of the orchestra, each instrument of the orchestra, and go through the score with the computer, try the mutes and so forth. So I like to hear it. As far as percussion, I have a huge percussion arsenal at home. So then I play the computer and I get out all my instruments, and I say, okay, I'll add a flexitone here, I'll add a whip here or whatever. Somebody asked me if I owned a whip today. Yes, I do. I have a big whip, percussion whip. So when I'm home, people are wondering, what's going on down there? Yes.
Other question? Cliff? Oh.
I was curious about the interface between the conductor and the composer, particularly with a new piece, something that hasn't been performed before and is sort of fresh off the press, and you send it to Marin. Marin has a take on how it should be played. I'd like if you could address how that interface, whether there's surprises from either way, whether you hear it from the orchestra the first time you go, whoa, I didn't think it was going to be that way, or vice versa, if when you interpret the piece, the kind of feedback either way that you get from the composers, either surprise or could you do it a different way, or how that interaction works.
Let's see. I don't want to give away everything, but You know, I think an important starting point for me is to try to be really open-minded about things, because you know, you can look at something on the page for a while, and often they'll do a MIDI, you know, some sort of computerized, computer-generated sort of mock-up for me, so I can hear, just get a general sound. I think yours was definitely the worst, Dave, with that thing that came at the beginning. Remember, with the glissando? What was that about? That was really strange.
Oh, yeah, because my computer can't sort of go... It goes,
so it's like... I was like, oh, wow. And, so, you know, I had to think, okay, it's got to be better than this. But, you know, one of the problems, though, with those things is they're so antiseptic. And, I mean, no matter how good they are, they really sound awful to me. You know, so I have to really try to be open-minded, and sometimes, you know, people don't do those at all, or I just don't listen to them. But I really try to give the piece a lot of time, and sometimes I'll talk to the composer about the proportion of the piece or the length of the piece. Mark and I spoke a lot, and I think generally I tend to work with composers who are also open to ideas and willing to give and take. I don't think here I've ever had the experience of making a suggestion and just being summarily dismissed by a composer. You know, everybody's really open to the idea. I mean, even Michael, even our concertmaster Yumi made a few suggestions about dynamics, or adding an extra octave here, or we talked, I mean, Dave, the thing about it is, every time I go to get my score out of my room, it's missing because they're making changes. This is the thing that, you know, and you have to, like, keep your eye on them. Michael is unbelievable. You know, he keeps taking my scores and adding things or taking things away, you know, and I'm, wait, where did that go? You know, and I think they're all afraid to tell me, but they're just going to sneak it in, and then, you know, I'm not going to notice. But I think that's the case for everyone here that whose music has been played so far. We made lots of changes, and I think especially for a composer listening to a new piece, you know, you have to hear it in the hall, and you have to hear how the dynamics work, don't you, and the balancing, and so we changed stuff in every single piece, for sure.
Marin, I would just like to add that a lot of people ask me, when is the composition process complete? And I think that for me, because of our recording age, it continues through the premiering process, the rehearsals and the premiere, still making adjustments, and then finally when it's recorded, we'll probably make a few more adjustments, and then I think that's when I feel personally that I can, like, put a stamp on that. Okay, enough. Next piece, you know. So so through this process, being here, I'm still composing, actually, with everybody working.
Also, I must say, in the defense of the composers, if you are pushing the edge, if you're always trying new ideas with sound and orchestration, sometimes you're going to hit it, sometimes you aren't. So in every piece, I'm always trying some new ideas, trying to push the boundaries, and so that's why I have to adjust things. Because if I just relied on the same tricks all the time, then yes, I know this works. But I'm always trying a new doubling or you know, new things, and so sometimes they work and sometimes they don't. But one thing I've learned, the conductor is always right.
That's true.
Very good. One of the things that was really funny is that I knew that the beginning of it sounded terrible on the computer. So when Marin said, you know, would you send me a mock-up? I sort of thought, oh, no. And I played it to my wife, and I sort of said, well, you know, well, what would you do? And she said, if someone sent me that, I would just think it was, they just didn't know their sort of what they were doing at all, because it sounded like... but I thought, on the other hand, that's not what I've written. You know, it's these computers. They just decide to do their own thing. So I actually said to her, why don't I just chop the first 10 bars off and just send Marin from where the chords come in and just say, oh, there is a bit before that. I went through this whole thing thinking she might cancel the piece if she hears this stuff. But the weird thing was that I finished the piece and I sent it off. And this is kind of part of the process that you were asking about before. And then I didn't listen to it for about 2 weeks, because, you know, these mock-ups you can sit. So after a couple of weeks, I sent it all off, the parts off to Ellen and all that, and I put it on the computer, and the old came off again. But we got through that, and I listened to it, and I thought, I've made a real cock-up of this. Like, there's bits in the wrong key. I should have chopped a bit out in the middle, you know. And so I rang up Ellen and I sort of said, Ellen, do you mind? Can I just send you another set of parts? But luckily, because the Sibelius and that's so quick, it wasn't such a big deal. But it's funny how, you have a bit of a break from something and you suddenly, something's quite obviously wrong, but I hadn't sussed it, even though I'd listened to it a million times, But I'm glad you got through the...
Yeah, no, it's no problem. I have faith always. Anybody else? Questions?
Earlier, you were talking about how it's okay to have emotion in music again, and I'm a professional musician myself, and one of my frustrations over the last 30 years has been that contemporary music has been, to me, very, very inaccessible, a lot of what they jokingly call honk squeak, and I have felt frustrated by the inaccessibility, and I was wondering, is the sound that we heard last night, is this the new cutting edge? Is this where contemporary music is going now?
Yes, actually, in the U.S., that's exactly where. As I move from orchestra to orchestra every week, I look at their entire season. This is like where we are. I think there are some exceptions to that, but it's definitely changed. It's funny, Michael and I were talking about when we were in school, our teachers were like, you can't write this, you can't. I used to get in trouble for writing melody all the time in school. I was always in trouble with my teachers. It's kind of funny when I think about it now. But we have turned a real tide, and I've heard a couple of artistic administrators make that exact same comment. We've turned a tide, so I take that as a good sign.
But we should really talk about this question of access and accessibility, because I think accessibility is a dirty word, and it often implies sort of lowest common denominator, accessible. And I mean, I always, one of the big criticisms of me, you've probably read, well, there's so many, it's hard to know where to start, but one of it's ironic, the people that write about music, they complain that nobody does new music, and then you devote a whole festival to new music and they complain that the new music is too accessible. Go figure, but I think there's a prejudice, especially among critics, and especially among a certain type of people, that it's sort of like, well, if you're a member, if the club invites me, how does that go? If you want me as a member of your club, it can't be any good. It's kind of that thing that, that if people understand it, or if I understand it, it can't be any good. But if nobody really understands it, it's got to be great. Do you know what I'm talking about? This sort of, and
we need to interchange the word accessible with communicative.
Exactly.
I think that's where the key is, because the fact of the matter is, I care if it communicates, and I think all of my colleagues here do too. And I think that may have been for a long time there was kind of an elitist sort of thought about it, and heck yeah, I'll be accessible. I think it's much harder to write accessible music than it is the non-accessible. You can write anything and don't have to plan anything out. If it's,
accessible doesn't mean this is the thing about it. I mean, that doesn't really define the intent of the piece, though. I mean, if you come to the concert tonight and hear the two pieces by Michael, and then you hear this piece by John Corigliano, all of the music is accessible. The kind of emotional reaction you'll have will be dramatically different, I think, to all the pieces. And just because it's accessible doesn't mean it's not profound. And just because it's accessible doesn't mean it's not, doesn't mean it's only fun. I mean, this is the thing. I mean, accessible doesn't mean superficial. It can be deep, it can be, so, I mean, it's such an interesting question, but I think a lot of the problem stems from actually the music industry itself, and a kind of prejudice. I mean, there's certainly a prejudice about conductors, that one of the problems, or one of the issues that I've faced, and my managers always tell me this, that, can you stop talking to the audience because you're too accessible? And so you're not, no, but listen, this is a serious issue. We talk about this all the time. And, I'm 50. They still don't get that they're not going to get anywhere with me. But, but I can see what the issue is, because in the industry, what happens is that people assume that I'm superficial because I can speak to an audience, and the musicians sometimes think I'm superficial. I mean, this is a very, again, superficial judging process. You know, they don't look beyond the surface, because if you have a sense of humor, you can't be deep. And if you can relate to people, you can't be deep. If you have emotion, you can't be deep. But if nobody understands what the heck you're talking about or what you're doing with your hands, you must be great. I'm serious. This is a real issue, and I've witnessed this obviously firsthand many times. But I just can't ascribe to this. I don't know if I mean, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Everybody knows. And he's surprised I'm saying all these things out loud, probably. But there are no journalists here today, maybe.
Oh, well then.
Yeah.
Well, another way to think about it is to write music that's very clear. You know, so it could be complex music. It can have complex ideas. I mean, I tend to take stuff from the modernist music, in other words, attention to dynamics, to all the details of structure and phrasing and orchestration, all those kinds of things. But at the same time, you can state it in a very clear way. It also has to do with timing, too, like how long you do something, right? Because things can go on too long. So the sense of timing can be important as well to communicate.
I think at any given moment in a piece, if you take a snapshot of you know, for those of us who write accessible music or communicative music, a musical composition can be extremely complex, as Michael was saying, just in terms of the aggregate sonorities. If you just stopped a piece, you would be amazed at the level of dissonance. For instance, there's always the surface texture of how a piece sounds and the structure underneath, and I think we always try to balance those things as we create a piece.
Also, the idea that style, musical style and originality is an ongoing achievement, I think, for all the composers. The newness of it is how it's perceived by the audience members and fellow musicians. I just came up with a string quartet that I've subtitled Bluegrass, and the notion that you could have a piece that sort of resembles Bartok hanging out in Kentucky. Some of those themes in there possibly are accessible, but the idea and the originality of it that I strive for is the new part.
We appreciate your comments about the excitement. I mean, there are a lot of ways to respond. I mean, I think this environment is completely idyllic on many levels. I've definitely tried to nurture that sense of accessibility and excitement and involvement. And every musician that comes here, I think, feels that way, that they're here because they have the right attitude. And there are not many places you go where people are included because they have the right attitude. And really, ultimately, that should be the only reason people are in a place, rather than, they play all the notes or this and that. I mean, this orchestra comes here, they don't get paid, they get a per diem, but they work really, really hard. And they never complain. Really, I mean, they were playing their you-know-whats off this morning at 10 a.m. after a really late night, and that's something you often can't do. So I think that it's a unique environment, but I also think that if programs are done intelligently, hearing contemporary music that's by living composer next to a Beethoven symphony can be terribly exciting also. If whoever the conductor is makes that connection for the audience, I mean, not necessarily speaking, but intellectually has connected the pieces, I think it can be really, really thrilling. And in case you're from Baltimore or in the area, you might want to come and hear my first season, which starts in September. I'm doing a Beethoven cycle, but several of the concerts are going to be conducted by living composers. So John Adams, I talked to him about Beethoven and said, you know, what kind of influence did Beethoven have on you as a composer? And we talked about this at length, and I said, which symphony would you like to conduct? And he said, you want me to conduct a Beethoven symphony? I said, absolutely. He said, oh, I have to have number 7. That's the minimalist symphony. You know what I mean? So John is coming to open the Beethoven cycle, and he's doing his music on the first half, and then he's doing Beethoven's 7th Symphony. I've asked him to speak to the audience about how Beethoven influenced him and how he, and same thing, Jimmy McMillan's coming to conduct, Tom Addis will conduct, H.K. Gruber will conduct. These are, you know, conductors, and then I'm going to do the rest of the symphonies, but I've paired them with music by John Corigliano, Chris Rouse, Joan Tower. I can't remember who else. I'm sorry. You know, it's a lot of music. But to me, it's our responsibility as conductors to really give people access to Beethoven in a new way. And no, I'm really going on and on. These composers are like, shut up already. Do I ever what? Yes, Beethoven First Symphony. I like that one. Well, you know, you
I see.
well, it depends on the drama of the program. I certainly have. I mean, you can't play like one of those loud Chris Rouse pieces before anything else because you're deaf after it. So you have to, you know, you have to really think about it. But anyway, I have gone on and on. So I'm sorry, it's really the composer luncheon. So not the conductor luncheon. Yes, I know, and you're giving me the high sign. Okay, we can get a couple more in, so I will stop talking. Yes.
Hi. I have a question.
Thank you.
Over the past year, has there been a concert that you have attended that you felt highly emotionally either very positive about or quite negative about, that you may not want to answer the latter, but what thrilled you, if anything?
Wow, that's a really great question. You guys jump in.
You want to start, Daniel?
No, go ahead.
Does it matter when the concert was? Does it have to be recent concert or just at some point? I have to think about that for a minute.
I will. This is a cop-out, but I had my doctoral recital in January. Yeah, I'm not sure which category that fits in, but it answers one of those.
Actually, I heard the LSO at Avery Fisher Hall a year ago with Colin Davis, and they played, the first half was Vaughan Williams' Sixth, and the second half was Walton First, and it was just electrifying to hear the Londoners play those two pieces at that feverish pitch. And I also love the music of William Walton. Those symphonies don't get played a lot. I even like the second symphony better than the first, which no one plays. But that was an amazing experience because it was just the visceral quality of the music. Colin Davis was in absolute command of the music, and the orchestra was just in command of the music too. I mean, it was an amazing dialogue between them, and the music just jumped off the stage. It was unforgettable.
Well, one of the most memorable concerts I've ever been to, which is quite ironic considering I'm an anti-avant-gardist really, was I heard a piece of Stockhausen called Memento, and it was like the most dramatic, incredible piece, one of the most incredible pieces I've ever heard. I mean, it's well worth checking out. And I had to go to the toilet for about half an hour to recover from it. It was so incredibly good. So, I mean, you know, there you go. That's worth checking out.
Actually, I had a lot of concerts last year. I was thinking about this, but I have to admit the most stunning moment for me was at the Drum and Bugle Corps World Finals when Boston Crusaders did a show that featured my Concerto for Orchestra and Blue Cathedral in a stadium of 50,000. And hearing my music come out of a marching band speeding across the field while sabers were flying across them. I have never, and watching the stadium rise up, I thought, this, my gosh, new music, it was stunning. I started thinking, can the back of the violin section learn to throw sabers? It was pretty intense.
lover of all kinds of music, and of course including string music. And speaking of John Adams, one of the most thrilling concerts I've seen recently, when John Adams conducted his own shaker loops. I thought that was really special. And here's to living composers and entertaining us in concert. And to see John Adams do that was very cool. And I think that's a great idea, Marin, to have him do it in Baltimore.
Every concert I hear at the Cabrillo Festival.
I'm not going to, it's impossible for me to answer that. You know, I try to go to as many concerts as I can. I find that London is really the place to go to concerts, though. I mean, and I'm thrilled by so many things I hear and so much of the music. But I have to say, maybe a little bit less so in America than I am in London. You go to hear the Orchestra of the Age of Enlightenment, you know, and initially you think, God, this sounds bloody awful, you know, because they're playing on original instruments. It's all like out of tune. It was. You know, then you sort of suspend your judgment and you realize this is a whole new way of making music or, you know, these kinds of things. But, I mean, besides the kind of attitude here and the commitment here, I mean, I have to say it's, for me, the London Symphony, London Philharmonic, this is the way to make music. These are people who you feel that their life depends on playing music. I mean, it's very similar to, I think, the way the musicians here are. So I'm getting the high sign about the time. Do you all have to go, or do we have time for one more question? Can we do, who's the last one? Somebody pick. Whoever, there you go. Well, you know, I don't know what your experience is. I mean, I don't know a tremendous amount about art, but when I speak to someone who really knows art or a painter, and they give me some guidance about what I'm looking at or looking for, I find it a much deeper experience. I like a curated experience, but some people don't. And, you know, when you use the word lecture, that's sort of, you know, maybe not quite the right way to put it. We have a lot of pre-concert lectures at concerts, and, you know, the same 100 people usually turn up. I always do post-concert talks because I think people have more questions after the concert than they have before the concert, and you get a different crowd, you know, it's kind of the late-night group, and they seem a little more hip. But I definitely think, or at least looser, they're not running off, you know. So I definitely think that talking about the music is good. I mean, you have to know, but it's just like composing music. I mean, you have to know when enough is enough. And just because I talk to you about the music doesn't mean I'm trying to impart what I think about it. I'm just sharing some of my thoughts. But music should be something that is an individual experience. I mean, that's why it's so great. And live music is completely dependent upon you, the audience. This is something else that I think we don't give we don't talk about enough, that music exists in time. So because you're at a certain concert, that concert is different. Even if you're quiet, especially if you're quiet. Because you're breathing that air, that concert is different because you're there. And I think we don't give our audiences nearly enough credit for the kind of, I mean, that's part of why this festival is so special, because you're here and you're open-minded. And just having that energy, I think, makes it a different experience. So we appreciate you very much. And I want to thank all my composers for being here today, and thank you very much for joining us.